Good morning. Welcome to Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series. I'm Lawrence Geller, the founder of For Advisors Only. This is the 28th of what we expect to be a great many webinars with Canadians who have dedicated their careers to learning the art and science of insurance sales and service. Webinars in this series are now scheduled through the end of this year, and more webinars are being added daily to the schedule. Over the years, I've observed that every successful insurance agent whom I've met has succeeded differently, even if they're in the same field, deal with similar clients, and even if they're related or in business together. This is what makes the sale and servicing of insurance one of the best careers that I can imagine. It is possible to become a success in our business with diligence, integrity, and experience. With this webinar series, we intend to prove that any type of person can succeed with time and hard, thoughtful work. Our goal is to create a video record for each of these masters of insurance so that some of their expertise and experience will be available to anyone who'd like to learn from them now or into the future. Today, we have Susan StAmand with us. Susan is the founder and president of the Sirius Group, Inc., Sirius Financial Services in Ottawa, Canada. Susan has a passion for entrepreneurial families and specializes in continuity planning. Her knowledge and experience in business, governance, strategy, philanthropy, and risk management, including life insurance, make her uniquely skilled. These achievements have led Susan to be named one of the top 50 women in Canada's life insurance industry, one of the top 50 leading women in wealth in 2023. And she was the recipient of the 2015 J.G. Taylor Award from the Institute for Advanced Financial Education. Susan is an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Ottawa Family Enterprise Legacy Institute. She's past chair of the Family Enterprise Canada. She is a past co-chair of the Ottawa Community Foundation and of the Institute of Corporate Directors, ICD. Ottawa chapter. She is past chair of the board of the Ottawa International Airport Authority, past director and chair of the board for a family-owned business, past chair of the Royal Ottawa Foundation for Mental Health, past chair of CALU, and she has served on 20 local, professional, and national boards. Susan is also one of the 20 founders of the Women for Mental Health campaign associated with the Royal Ottawa Centre for Mental Health. Susan is a member of the International Women's Forum, past chair of the Ottawa chapter, and past chair of the Ottawa chapter of the Institute for Corporate Directors. On a personal note, our friend and mentor, Joe Dixty, was particularly proud of Susan throughout her career. Susan continues to engage in professional education programs, keeps current with legislation, and is involved in professional associations interacting with allied professions. She presents at various professional industry events, has written articles for publication, and is frequently interviewed by the media. I'll be interviewing Susan. As I said, we have booked webinars and interviews through the end of 2024, with new interviews being added daily, and we continue to look for people to interview. So if you know of any people who you consider to be masters of insurance, please get in touch with me and let me know who we should be speaking with. Good morning, Susan. Thank you for joining.
Good morning, Lawrence. Thank you.
And I've lost you again. Try again.
Good morning, Lawrence. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. My apologies.
An honor.
Thank you. Susan, you started in financial services in an area other than insurance. Tell me about that.
Lawrence, I was born the child of an entrepreneur and the grandchild of another entrepreneur. And so business and family were always in my life. And in my final year of school, where I took a business and marketing degree, I was the youngest in my family, and my father decided it was time to retire because I was finishing school. And so he offered the business to my brother. and instead didn't ask me at all. My brother said, absolutely not. Why would I ever want to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year? And I had worked for my dad for many years. So when I found out my dad was selling it, he had told me that he was selling it to someone else. And I thought, well, what am I going to do then? And I had always done bookkeeping and I always worked with numbers. And so I then applied for every job that you could imagine, because at the time, similar to today, it wasn't easy graduating and getting a good job. And I was fortunate to be recruited by one of the major banks into the management training program, where I then worked for a major financial institution for 7 years through the management training program, 7 branches. I always worked with business owners. I did investments. At the time, they didn't own the brokerages. This was in the early 80s. Interest rates were 20%. So you can imagine what happened in many small businesses. It was a very difficult time for them. And I decided that I liked working with people and clients, and I liked business owners. And I had actually worked in the estates area, because when you're in different branches and you're in management, you end up looking after all of the estates. So I learned a lot about what happens when entrepreneurs die. I learned a lot about what happens to businesses and to families in that instance. And so through my banking, I then decided, at one point in time, that I wanted to work for myself, because like my father and my grandfather, I really liked people and I really liked working, and there was no point in just always working for a large financial institution. So that's where I started, financial institution.
What led you to insurance?
Well, as I was determining what it was that I was going to do, because I really wasn't sure what kind of business I was going to get into and operate, I then decided that I would just open my mind to things. And it happens to be that Alan Bulla, who at the time was a manager of North American Life, walked into the branch and said, I am so impressed with the way you deal with clients. And I've seen you when somebody's got an issue and you take control. And he said, have you ever thought about changing careers? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, right now is exactly what I'm trying to do, decide what kind of business I want to run. And he said, well, let me tell you about the life insurance business. And from there, he started telling me about the life insurance business, and I took my time. I did not rush. I spent probably 6 months learning, going to the office, and Alan introduced me to many other producers, in particular producers from creative planning, and I met Lawrence Geller there, and that's how I got started, was finding that there were people that I respected, that I thought had a lot of integrity, that cared about other people, and this was the kind of business I wanted to be in.
In the 80s, insurance was still very much a men's career. There were not a lot of ladies in the field. How did you find your first clients, Susan?
That was an interesting, you're absolutely right, Lawrence. There were very, very few females. Even today, there's still not as many as I personally would like to see. But what I did was I determined that, and I also was in a city in Ottawa, where I had only lived there for a year, and I didn't know a lot of people. So I had to start by, I've got to meet people. And I actually started looking through newspaper articles and reading stories about family businesses and thinking, these are the people I want to meet. And so I would phone them up and say, I'm in a new business. I know you're in business. Can we have a cup of coffee? Can we have lunch? Can I buy you lunch? Can I buy you coffee? And I would just ask them about how they got started and ask them about their business and what they were doing and had they thought about succession. And because I wanted to work with family businesses, and that wasn't always an easy market for me in a town where I didn't know people, I also realized that I should get to know the professionals that were working with them. And I started taking the lawyers and the accountants, the new ones, you know, they were advertising. You probably get it off LinkedIn today, but at the time it was in the local newspapers and things. So-and-so has just been called to the bar and they're joining this firm. And so I would contact them and I would say, you know, your best asset is the ability to earn an income. What about disability insurance? And I would actually start to get them as clients, these collaborating advisors, and that were in different fields. And I would start to build my collaborative teams, and then we started working together on cases.
You've been a team player for as long as I've known you. How do you get lawyers and accountants to believe that you're their equal?
That's a good question, Lawrence. I think that I'm not sure how I get them to think that. I think that what it is I share with them knowledge and information with no expectation. And so they start to learn and they start to come to me and ask me questions. So I start by asking them questions about what they're doing. And, you know, I have a client in this circumstance and, you know, what do you think about this? And can we? And we have a dialogue and conversation. And one thing that I never do is make them look bad in front of a client. I will contact them before, I will contact them after. We will have a conversation so that we're on the same page. But we basically go in to a meeting with a client with the supportive collaboration in mind. And many of them became my clients.
That's the second time in 5 minutes you've used the word collaborate. Collaboration. What does that mean to you when it comes to dealing with families?
To me, collaboration means we're all working together for the same purpose. And the purpose is to look after the family requirements, to never do harm to the family, and to work in harmony with one another to make sure that we are all on the same page. So a lot of dialogue back and forth, keeping each other in the loop with things and the way in which we work and what's happening with the family, making sure that nobody's blindsided. And there are times when you challenge, and I would say, or when I challenge, and I would say there are times like that when there's a lawyer and accountant that are looking at a reorganization or some changes in structure, and I'll come in and take a look at it and meet with them, not right in front of the client, and say, hello, but these are the best tax results. If they will upset what we're trying to do over here and create problems within the communication structure or the psychological safety of someone or whatever it is that's bothering them. So we will then go back to the drawing table and say, what is the best result for the family that encompasses the tax, the finances, the employees in the business, if they have a business, to make sure that they're okay, so that we are all rowing towards the same purpose that is the client's purpose, which isn't always the same purpose as the advisor's purpose. So in other words, the lawyer and the accountant might say the best thing for this family is pay the lowest tax possible. But in reality, that may not be the priority and the purpose for the family. The family may be fine and saying, I'm willing to pay a little more tax, but I want to make sure that my employees are okay. I want to make sure there's enough money in the kitty that my kids can still have their philanthropic foundation and work together on the things that are meaningful to them. So there are many different priorities, and having aligned priorities is very important.
It's been my experience that lawyers are very, very good at telling you what is legally possible. And accountants are very, very good at estimating what it might cost or what the benefit might be financially. But it seems to me that your role may be more of one of investigative, to try to determine what the family wants. When did you start doing that?
Lawrence, I think in my life insurance career, I've probably always done that. And I think partially it's from mentors like yourself, mentors like Joe Dickstein for sure, the broad concept, and just always remembering that it's really the client's priorities that matter, not mine. It's the priority of the client. And I think that's why finding like-minded professionals who believe the same to collaborate with is really important to me. That I am collaborating with professionals that feel as well the importance of making sure that as lifelong relational advisors to the family, that we look after what their priorities are.
That suggests that you bring the other advisors to the table, rather than the family or the enterprise already having advisors in place. What happens if there are advisors in place and they're not in collaboration?
If there are other advisors in place, which happens very frequently, I often work with, I will always tell my clients' advisors and my client, I'm not here to disrupt relationships that you have. I am here to work with the relationships that you have. And if there is an issue or a problem and we can't work together, then we will tell you. One of us will tell you, and one of us may not be around for much longer. We may make changes. You may decide to make changes, but I always tell them it's up to you. And your long-term relationships, if they're important to you, they're important to the way in which we interact and work together. So I do often bring them to the table, but only if it's required.
Okay, so let's go back to that again. So now you're in a relationship with the family. You
Yes.
have some idea of what they want. And the advisors who are in place are saying, yeah, but that's not the best tax consequence. We're going to push for the best tax consequence. Now what?
Then I ask the client, we get together, and I suggest that we get together, all of us, and say, here's your options. Here's the best tax. This is what's been presented here. Here's based on what your purpose and what you've indicated is a priority for you and the family. Here's what the alternative is. Sometimes there's 3 alternatives. Here's the in-between. You are the client. It is your choice. You decide what your priority is, and we will all live with it. Because after all, it's their money, it's their family, it's their business, we're just there to advise.
One of our partners with creative planning, about 35, 40 years ago, back then, dyed his hair, put some gray in his hair. So he was taken more seriously by the clients. As I recall, when you started, you were a bit younger than you are now. Was it difficult to get taken seriously by families?
It was difficult to be taken seriously by advisors as well as families. In particular, yes, I was very young, but I was also a female. And as much as there are females in the life insurance business, and there are in banking now, at that point in time, there were not a lot in the advisory sector at all. So there were not necessarily a lot there were not a lot of accounting partners, but there were more in the accounting field that were partners than there were lawyers. And there was certainly not many in the investment field. So it was a little bit of a double in that I had to work twice as hard and make sure that I really knew my stuff. And let's say I worked twice as hard as everybody else, but I think I had to find what my niche was.
You have about as many designations as most people I know, maybe more. So education must have been an important part of your career. When did you start? You started clearly before you came into the business because you said you researched. But when did you actually start the formal part?
Immediately, as soon as I could. As soon as I finished my LUATC, I had already started doing courses when I was in the bank. I had gone through the Institute of Bankers at that point in time. And I'm a confessed education junkie. I just love learning. I'm a very curious person. You can see by the number of boards that I've been on that I have a lot of interests, and I just want to learn and try to be the best that I can be. So I started immediately when I was in the business after LUATC to take my CALU and my CHFC, and then when STEP first came to Canada, I was involved in Ottawa at the very beginning, getting involved with what now the designation is TEP. I mean, it was at the time as well, but I was involved in Ottawa and trying to get that up and running. And so just constantly, always taking courses and learning about things. In fact, one of the ways in which I'm going to say it ended up being prospecting. I'm not really sure that's what it was intended to, but I had clients early on that were referred to me by other advisors, lawyers, and accountants, and they were in the world of high technology. And you can remember when Ottawa was a high-tech mecca. And so I would go to the technology executive breakfast to meet all the technology executives and founders and entrepreneurs and innovators that I could, because I felt an obligation to learn about my client's business. If they were investing all their family's money in technology, then I needed to know a little bit about what they were doing. And so I ended up getting clients out of that, but also I ended up doing seminars with very trusted advisors that were legal and accounting. And I would talk about shareholders agreements, and I would talk about employee benefits and employee benefits for US employees. Even though I wasn't necessarily, an expert in all of those fields, what I felt it was my responsibility to do was to open it up for anybody in the room that was an insurance person to be able to talk comfortably to the innovators in the room that were entrepreneurs in the world of high tech.
I seem to recall that at one point, the CLU Institute in Ottawa was having difficulty getting people to meetings, and you got involved with that. So you really did spend time helping other agents to learn
Yes.
that you had. Do you still do that?
That's a good question, Lawrence. I'm still in a study group, and I still will speak to anybody that wishes to give me a call, and I'm happy to mentor others. I'm happy to be involved in them. And yes, actually, there are 4 or 5 at least other advisors in Ottawa. And if there is a piece of business that I can't do, or that I feel somebody else will do a better job, I will refer it to them. And I will work collaboratively with other insurance agents. I do that quite frequently. And I always have.
You've been involved with PPI for a long time. I guess possibly partially because of our friend Joe and Jim Burton. Has PPI brought something to you that otherwise you might not have found?
Yes, Lawrence. PPI has always had some great advanced planning people that have been supportive and accessible, and I'm going to say quite impactful positively, not just on my career, but also I would say on others. They were very involved with CALU and providing some high-end information, some high-end speakers. They were sponsors, not sponsors, but in terms of having employees available for whether it's some of the taxation, etc. But Kevin Wark, who was there, Glenn, I mean, the legal and accounting that really understood and could educate more on the tax aspects and on the life insurance. The underwriting, Romeo Vitigliero, he is amazing. So I learned a lot, and I would say that they brought a lot of professionalism to the way in which I presented some of my cases, and I felt very comfortable bringing them in. And I know that since then, there's other companies that have formed some very good high-end advisory groups within their organizations.
Yeah, the PPI, I think, was very, very much at the beginning of it. So even with all of your education and all of the time you've spent learning about the business and about the clients and about taxes and about everything else, you still use other experts.
Yes.
Why?
I don't pretend to know everything. I probably know enough to be a little bit dangerous in that I know the right questions to ask. And then I get to a point where I really would, I'm not always right. So I like to have other people's opinion. I like to be able to have discussion on different points. I think that having different perspectives becomes very important in what I do. So the perspective of somebody, Diane Everett, who might be assisting in a legal aspect, might be extremely valuable. But if the expert has never actually dealt with a client in a situation that my client's in, then I can bring a different perspective. And then we can have a bit of a back and forth over. So again, this is the best result on this, this, and this, but we have this issue. So is there another way around that? So again, it's just bringing in the different perspectives and expanding my knowledge and confirming anything new, what else is going on, what other people might consider to be good solutions.
If a young lady came to you, 25, 30 years old, and said, I'm interested in insurance, what would the first three things you'd say to her?
The first three things I would say. I would probably ask how much they knew about life insurance, what their experience has been, if anything. I would ask why. And then I would probably ask about what their purpose was and what they valued about the life insurance business.
Why are questions more valuable than statements?
Questions help people think and provide some reflection on the direction in which they want to go.
We talked about the broad concept. We talked about essentially the broad questioning technique. Do you use it in its pure form, or have you modified it over the years?
I haven't really thought about that. I probably have modified it to suit my style. Everybody's a little different. And I've probably modified it to suit my style. The other thing I should mention is, I'm one of these oddities that really loves numbers. So as much as the broad concept and the questioning and my strength is probably in all of those things, I really love to look at numbers too, and to try to, and so I actually have to pull myself out of getting too deep into the numbers and spending too much time on those items, which is another reason why collaboration and questioning is always really important to me.
Is it an ability, the questioning, the ability to focus in by asking questions. Is that an ability you found in other professions, or is it something that you find you uniquely bring to most of the collaborative relationships you're in?
I would say that it is not a natural in most professions. In particular, in many of the professions, the training is more directed towards finding a solution that they believe is the best interest of the client, instead of letting the client direct what the best interest of the client is. So they are often focused on the solutions and not resolving the problem. So I find that particularly in the life insurance business, it's not just me. I truly believe one of our strongest points is that in the life insurance business, you need to ask a lot of questions. We get more information from clients than any other advisor.
Mel Gilbert used to talk about how walking into a client's office and asking whether their will was signed was one of his best prospecting techniques. Do you find that people don't understand their wills that they have? And what do you do when that happens?
I find people most frequently, they do not understand what their wills say. They don't understand whether they're signed or not, or up to date. And they remember things the way they remember them. We all have the potential to perhaps remember things the way we'd like to think we did things, as opposed to the way it ended up. But very few clients or prospects or people that I meet actually understand their will. It's, when I get a life insurance application signed, I always, when I go through the delivery of a policy and I walk through the policy and some of the policy contractual obligations, I always say, you're never going to remember anything I tell you, but I'm telling you anyway. And I'm going to highlight some of these pieces, but they're not going to, and they never remember, especially 30 years later. And it's the same thing with a will. They think that maybe their cousin is the executor, but they're not sure. Or maybe it's the 3 kids together, or maybe it's, 2 kids. And then they look at them and they're surprised when they're out of date, that they have nobody listed to look after the children, that there are no restrictions. So it's a good exercise to go through, and I probably learned it from Mel Gilbert, to go through the wills. And I recommend to my clients that we review them every 3 years at minimum, just because things in life change. There are things in life that we don't anticipate. Sometimes, life and death don't happen in the order in which we expect. And so there are changes that need to be made, and there are discussions that need to be had about some of the changes that have happened in life.
Okay, so you're referred to a new family and you're meeting them for the first time. What does it look like?
I generally, it's interesting because there's the pre-COVID and the post-COVID. As some of your other panelists have said, if it's in person, which I prefer it to be in person, generally I am referred in from somebody, so that somebody makes an introduction. And then I ask them about whether it's their business or their family. And I start asking questions. I give them a little background about me, tell them about the fact that I have a life insurance business. I also am a family enterprise advisor, and that I've been very involved in governance and strategy over the years. And then, generally speaking, they start to ask me questions that relate around some of the questions they have that they want to solve.
And how do you figure out whether what they're doing now, their current plans, will achieve the purpose that they're talking about?
We talk a lot about process and structure and being intentional and setting aside time and money to think about what they really want to happen. And it is a process. And I always tell them, this is not like we're going to have 2-3 meetings and you're going to be done. Because this is about a process that takes time and it will change over time, just as everything in your life will change over time. So I would say that the meetings that we have usually start with about an hour, where I start asking questions about what they really want and what their current structure is and what they think is going to happen based on their current documentation. And I get copies of everything from their wills to their insurance policies to their investments. And we put together a little bit of a puzzle, like a map, that shows where all of their assets are and shows what would happen if they died tomorrow based on the planning that they've done to date, and what some options or alternatives are. So it usually takes 2 or 3 meetings to actually get to that point, and then develop some educational processes for next generation families.
You talked about the vagaries of people's memories. And you've talked about the discussions you have with them about it being intentional, about being conscious competence, if you wish. How does the reporting look? What does the reporting look?
The reporting that I have to them?
Yes.
I provide reports, both written and verbal. So they've got detailed information as to here's where we started. Here's, the based on the conversations, what you've decided you want to happen. And there is often correspondence between the other advisors. So I will, be in conversation with the lawyers and the clients about their wills, about their reorganization if they're reorganizing corporate assets, and they will get copies of everything. Often it depends on the client. Sometimes I actually sort of draw pictures. I can't really draw. But I will do a bit of a PowerPoint that shows in some form of picture chart graph what would have happened and what the transition has been. And in one instance, one family, it's taken me about 3-4 years to simplify their structure with their other advisors and to get them to the point where they wanted to be.
So you've talked about how this is a long process. It's a long-term process. It's not a one and be done. How often do you revisit the prior discussions and the prior, how do you make sure the client's recollection is up to date, if you wish?
We revisit at least on an annual basis, if not more. So, and we revisit with more than just one client. So when I take on a client family, I actually meet with all the family members. Even before I started dealing with the entire family, when I did life insurance sales and dealt with one person of the family, maybe it's the patriarch or the matriarch, I always said, I would like to meet your beneficiaries, because if anything happens to you, I'm the one delivering the check, and I would like them to know who I am. And it's the same thing in the family enterprise system. To work within a family system, it's important for me to know and understand the other family members, and for them to feel comfortable to come to me when there's a change in their life, even if they're not yet sure how they want to explain it to other family members.
So that's continuity planning, as I understand. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Now we're 20 years in, and the matriarch is getting a little bit older, and the daughters are taking over. continuity planning must have a part in that. Is there a transitional planning that takes place?
Absolutely. Transitional planning is critical. There are, and this is why I say they have to be intentional about putting time and money aside. We have family meetings where we reinforce, revisit, relook at things all the time. So in other words, there may be a family policy about how decisions are going to be made when the patriarch or the matriarch or the current CEO is going to transition into a new role. So we actually talk about that all the way through. There are policies about which family members get to work in the business and who doesn't and why. And so they have family policies, and those are revisited as people change within the business itself. It's the same thing when family members get married or have children. So we're constantly revisiting the different processes and policies that the family have, which means we're also revisiting the insurance. Because, we set it up this way, and this was the way the beneficiary worked, and now we need to make a change, and how is this going to work? So it's a very much a holistic overall look at things. And just like going to go for a medical checkup every year, it's a good idea to check in and check up on how are we going to make decisions now? Because sometimes people don't always get along, and you may have made the decision that in governance, when the governance changes and there is a transition and a change, that it's going to go one way, and then something happens and the people that are supposed to be working together are no longer speaking to each other. And you need to make that change. So you need to put in some guidelines, and you need to put in some review periods.
One of Joe Dickstein's favorite stories ended, "Thank God Dad's not dead, let's plan." Joe always reminded me that families get along fantastically until the matriarch or patriarch dies. And then when money's at stake, often they don't. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's interesting. I actually tell families from the beginning that I'm a bit of the Grim Reaper, because I'm going to talk about death and dying all the time. And one of the things that I also say in the planning process, having been involved in more estates than you can imagine, just both from my banking background and my insurance and family. And I always say one thing, and that is that when somebody dies, you really don't know whether it's going to bring out the best in people or the worst in people. It is a really difficult thing to go through when you lose somebody in a family, and people react differently, and you don't know what is going to happen. Even the person themselves often surprises themselves in the way in which they act. So it can, in that period of rawness, in that really difficult time when somebody does die, it's really important to be able to have the ability to take a breath and give yourselves some time to heal and think about things before you make drastic decisions. And so I talk upfront about that and throughout the process, and I remind people when we do reviews. And maybe that's one of the benefits to being a woman is, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, but I seem to get away with it maybe easier than other people do, or maybe I'm just more comfortable with it because I've been so involved in estates and life insurance.
That was actually going to be one of my questions a while back, as the mother of two now very successful young ladies. How has that influenced the way that you've dealt with families in your insurance career?
It's been very influential, partially because I've always felt it really important. Look, my youngest daughter, whose name is Laura, used to say to me, "Mom, why do you always talk about money?" And I said, well, because it's what pays for your education and the clothing and the food that we eat and so I talk to my clients about what they value about money and what they think the purpose of money is. That's a really hard question for people to answer. It's what is the purpose of money to you? And, some people it's easy. It's, I want to be able to go buy whatever designer clothing I want, whenever. One said to me one day, they said, I just want to know that I can always just write checks and it's never going to bounce and I don't have to worry about it. That's all I want to know. And then you've got the other ones that are like, I want to make sure that if somebody in my family has a healthcare need, that it's answered immediately. One said to me, my wife was diagnosed with MS at a young age. And I knew one thing in life, and that was if I had enough money, I might be able to help find a cure. And so that's what drove me to become an extremely successful business person, to have enough money that I could help find a cure for MS. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. And, 30, 40 years later, people have forgotten what the drive was, but everybody's got a drive somewhere. So I think that in being able to have conversations with my children and being able to talk to them about the value of saving and the difference between the stress that you have when you're living paycheck to paycheck and the stress that you alleviate when you've actually got a little bit of money in the bank. I think that's helped a lot. It's helped a lot in my conversations and also in trying to determine different ways of having an educational pathway to learn about financial literacy and, just even things like borrowing money. So empowering and providing the next generation with the ability to be responsible, accountable, and independent drives me in working with the next generation of my family. And that's partially because that's what I want for my daughters.
Some time ago, we met a young lady named Farah Muhammad. And you got involved in the Girls 20, the G20 project, because Farah was trying to help young ladies to become financially literate. Is there a big difference between the financial literacy of ladies and gentlemen today, or is it getting closer?
Lawrence, that's a difficult question to answer because I think that what I'm seeing now is there was a bigger difference, and women certainly of my age became more literate for a while, and it became more important. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing now with some of the younger generations is it's going backwards instead of forwards. And I really had to think hard about this. And one of the things that this is just my perception and my, own opinion of this. It is a total privilege to be able to, if you're a young woman, stay home and look after your children and not feel you have to go out and earn your own independent income. And it is with a sense of pride that we can say, oh, my children don't have to go to work. They're okay just living off, or they can work for the family foundation or whatever it is. So there is this privilege that they've got. And so I think it's become, again, very really beneficial for people to say, it's okay, I don't have to worry about this. Somebody else is taking care of me, or I pay other people to take care of me. And I worry about that because I worry about the lack of knowledge and information. It's okay to hire other people to do your investments and to do other things. There's nothing wrong with that. But to have some kind of understanding yourself as to know which questions, to have some line of sight as to what's happening, to feel that you've got some financial independence and you're not stuck in a relationship that you don't want to be in because you can't leave and you can't take your children with you and you're trapped in a situation where you have no means of your own. that I think is a danger and a difficult place to be in. So I would say that I'd like to say that it has improved. I worry that it hasn't improved. So I'm really not sure what the answer to that question is at this point in time. I do know that certainly the families that I work with, we build educational platforms for the next generation to start to understand what does leverage mean and what can happen when interest rates go up and asset values go down, and what questions do I need to ask, and what do I look for in an advisor, and how do I know whether or not I've got enough liquidity, and how do I know that I'm going to have enough for if I'm alone and need to deal with things, or if my partner dies, or if something else happens. So I think that there's more information available. There are less females in the C-suite now of large publicly traded companies than there were a few years back. We still don't have enough females on the boards of directors of companies. And so decision making, if we're going to have more equality in the decision making, then females need to take the responsibility on themselves to start to learn and to become more advanced in their knowledge of finances. And they need to be encouraged to do that.
Are your discussions with G2 or G3 female members of families different than G2 or G3 male members of the family?
Not really that different, but sometimes in some families a little different. Partially because, again, the whole bringing up of children is still very much more on the female side of things. How do I continue in my career or working for the family business or doing this while I have young children? I can say that in my business and in my life, one of the benefits that we have in this business is that when my children were young, I could go on every school trip and spend as much time as I wanted with them. Because I say that I don't have a balanced life, I have an integrated life. So I would do a little bit of work in the morning before getting the kids up and ready for school, and drop them off and work during the day, and then pick them up at the end of the day and supervise their homework and have their dinner. And then I do a little more work in the evening. I didn't have evening appointments, but I still did some work and some educational pieces in the evenings. And I think that in this business, that's really helped. So I actually work and try to coach younger women in next generations who have families, that yes, your family is your priority, but you also can make time to do all of the other things and be equal in terms of what you're doing in the business or your own profession or your own business.
I remember speaking with several people who told me over the years that people with money suffer imposter complex at least as frequently as the rest of us. Do you find the G2 and G3 have that problem, and how do you talk with them about it?
Definitely G2 and G3 often have that problem. And somebody asked me once, who has a new generation growing up, they said, what do you think is one of the most important things as a parent for us to instill in our children? And I said, confidence. They need confidence that they can be okay, that they are what they need to be and what they want to be, and that it's okay. And which means you have to let them take risks. You have to give them responsibility and make them accountable, because that's the way in which they'll build their confidence. They'll fall down, but they can pick themselves back up. They don't always need you doing everything for them. And when they have that feeling and confidence that they can do things on their own, then they're much more or less likely to have the imposter syndrome impact them so negatively in their lives.
So helicopter parenting might not be the answer.
Entitlement is a difficult thing, and people complain about young generations being entitled. And as one person said to me, who is a next generation that is always told that they are entitled, he said, well, if I'm entitled, it's because that's the way I learned how to be. So you only, parents, have yourselves to blame for me being entitled.
Okay, I'm not sure I like to blame other people for my problems, but there you go. Tell me what your attitude is towards balance sheet, budgeting for an insurance agent, not for the clients.
A balance sheet, I think it's important to review your balance sheet frequently. I think it's important that your assets always exceed your liabilities, and that when you have liabilities, that you understand the impact of leverage and interest rate changes and asset fluctuations.
Well, the same things for us as our clients.
Yes,
Do you
very
find-
much so.
How difficult is it to deal with the cobbler's children scenario then?
It's always difficult to deal with the cobbler's children. And I think that's why the questions are so important, and holding the mirror up so that people can see, because you often don't see what's right in front of you.
We're almost at the end. What advice would you give to someone new, whether they're in the business or not, starting a career?
I would advise them very much the way I was advised, to build your integrity, always look after the client's needs and listen to what they're saying. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listening is really important. Questioning is really important, and focusing on what the client wants and needs, and developing and providing them what is best for them will always work out in your best interest.
Thank you, Susan. This has been very informative and exactly what I was hoping for. I think it's important to know that you can be at the top of the career with diligence, hard work, and by learning to be a master or mistress of your craft. I guess principal of your craft would be the proper phraseology today. Next week, sorry, give me 1 second. We have it's going to be one of those days, my apologies. There we go. Next week, we have Gord Hart with us, and Dave Patriarch will be interviewing. And the following week, we have Dale Enns from Calgary, and Julian Wise will be interviewing him. Following a break at the beginning of September, on the 12th of September, Ted Warburton will be with us. And then Roger McMillan, Steve Meldrum, who is a very bright young light, Morty Sachs, gentleman who has been an expert in insurance for as long as I've been around and far longer, Sandy Pollock, also from Ottawa, Joe Sheehan, Don Forbes, then Michael Links, and then Ross Durant, one of the true experts in our business. Miles Posner will follow that, and then Joel Kadensky, and then Paul Williamson. So we're ending the year with people who've been in the business and have learned it, and have been experts at philanthropy and at building their communities, just as Susan has. So thank you, Susan StAmand, for joining us. Chris DeBarzo, thank you for your technical assistance, and we look forward to seeing you all next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for the next interview in the Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series. Thank you.